Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. They say the Cascade Mountains are beautiful in autumn. Peaceful. Healing. I went there alone, looking for that peace after a brutal breakup that hollowed me out like a jack-o'-lantern. I needed quiet. I needed space. I needed to feel something that didn't hurt. I drove 6 hours from the city, through winding roads littered with orange and red leaves. No cell service, no GPS, just the hum of my engine and a half-charged Bluetooth speaker playing soft indie rock until that too cut out. By the time I reached the lake, hidden off the main trails, I felt like I'd left the world behind. And maybe I had. The lake was still like a glass mirror. Trees leaned over the shoreline, whispering to each other in the breeze. It was perfect. Too perfect. I pitched my tent maybe 20 feet from the water's edge, set up a tiny fire pit, and made instant noodles. That night, under a sky smeared with stars, I convinced myself that everything was going to be okay, that this solitude would fix me. I was asleep by 10, and then came the sound. Zizitsia. It was unmistakable, the slow, steady sound of a tent zipper being pulled open. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath. My tent was dark, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my fingertips. I waited, thinking maybe it had been a dream, or maybe the wind. But there was no wind. Not then. Then I heard it again. Zizitsia. Only this time, it wasn't mine. I sat up slowly and unzipped the door just an inch, just enough to peek outside. There was another tent next to mine. It was old, moss green, frayed at the edges, slouching like it had been there for decades. I swear to God it hadn't been there when I set up camp. I would have noticed. It was no more than 10 feet from me, just far enough that I could see it in the moonlight. But I saw no one, no lantern, no flashlight, no flicker of life. Then I heard breathing, slow, heavy breathing, like someone with damaged lungs. It came from inside that green tent. I whispered, "Hello." No answer, just more breathing. I sat there, frozen. The kind of fear that seeps into your bones, quiet but loud, like a scream you can't let out. My rational brain told me it had to be another hiker, someone who came late, set up, and fell asleep. Maybe I just didn't hear them arrive. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. That tent wasn't there earlier. I would have seen it. I tried to sleep. I really did. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard that breathing. Steady, raspy, almost mechanical, like someone gasping through an old machine. The fire burned out. The night grew colder. And I just lay there, curled up in my sleeping bag, eyes open, waiting for morning. When light finally filtered through the nylon walls of my tent, I bolted outside. The green tent was gone. No flattened grass. No drag marks. No footprints. Nothing. It was like it had never been there. I stood there for a while, shivering, scanning the trees for any movement. My breath clouded the air. The lake was still. The birds chirped like nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. Something had come in the night, and now it was gone. I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. No breakfast, no coffee, just survival mode. On my way out of the woods, I ran into a forest ranger, an old guy with sunburnt cheeks and a faded vest. I asked him, casually, if he knew anyone else camping near the lake. Maybe someone had wandered off. He gave me this long, narrow-eyed look and asked which side of the lake I was on. I told him. He nodded slowly. "You see a green tent?" I felt my blood go cold. "Yeah," I said. "Last night. It was there, then it wasn't." He let out a dry breath. Not quite a sigh. More like the air being let out of a tire. "Years back," he said, "a man went missing out here. Camp alone near that lake. Was going through a divorce or something. He pitched a green tent. Never came back. Did they find his body?" I asked. "No," he said, "but some folks say they've seen that tent. Shows up in the same spot. Just for a night." He paused, looking at me, and then added something that stuck in my brain like a splinter. "They say he's still trying to come home. I left the mountains that day and haven't been back since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that sound in my dreams. Zizitsia, and the breathing. And I wonder if maybe I hadn't stayed quiet, if I'd opened that flap, what I would have seen. Or worse, who would have seen me?" Story 2. We never should have gone in northern Arizona. It started innocently enough, the whole trip. A few friends and I, college kids, a little wild, maybe a little dumb, decided to do something off the beaten path. You know, the kind of stuff you think will make for great stories in a few years. We packed our tents, threw in some cheap whiskey, and took off to get away from the distractions of school and life for a while. No cell service, no worries. Just the forest, the stars, and the promise of some wild nights around a campfire. The first few days went smoothly enough. We set up our camp near a creek, laughing, telling stories, and getting drunk as the days slipped into nights. We'd hike during the day and gather around the fire at night, our heads spinning with more booze than sense. It was fun, the kind of carefree fun that made you feel invincible. That was until we found it. It was on the third night. We had all gotten a little too drunk, our jokes growing louder, our laughter more reckless. I don't know why we wandered so far from camp, maybe to find more firewood or just because we were being idiots, but we ended up about 50 feet from our site, and there it was. At first, we thought it was just another fire pit, maybe left over from someone else who'd camped here before. But as we drew closer, we saw it wasn't just a fire pit. It was wrong. It was a circle of blackened ash, the remains of a fire long burned out. But what made it strange was how deliberate it looked, like someone had taken the time to arrange it. Each piece of ash placed in a perfect ring, no stray bits of burning would scattered about. Inside the ring were bones, small animal bones, but they weren't just thrown there like garbage. They were arranged carefully, like someone had set them in a pattern. And the dirt around the circle was disturbed, scrawled with symbols, crude and jagged, but clearly intentional. Some of the bones still had fur on them, or at least remnants of it, stuck to the edges like something had clawed its way out. At first, we laughed it off. A few drunken comments about witches and cults. We made jokes about it, took pictures, dared each other to touch the bones. Typical college kid behavior. Stupid, brash, and reckless. But something about that circle, the way it seemed to pull at me, just didn't sit right. I pushed the feeling down. We all did. But the unease stayed with me, like a cold draft in the back of my mind. That night, things started to change. We sat around the fire back at camp, trying to shake off the strange find. The whiskey flowed, the stories got darker. I remember the crackle of the fire, the way the smoke curled up into the black sky. But as the night wore on, something shifted. I can't say when it started. Maybe it was around midnight, maybe a little later. I woke up to a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees. But then it came again, a low, unintelligible murmur, close to my ear, too close for comfort. I lay perfectly still, my heart thumping in my chest. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I knew something wasn't right. The whispering continued, growing louder, more distinct. But it wasn't just one voice, it was many. A chorus of whispers, a dozen voices, no, more like 20. They were speaking all at once, but none of it made any sense. Words I couldn't understand, syllables that twisted and spiraled, too foreign to follow. I held my breath, my body rigid with fear. There was a gap between the whispers, like they were waiting for something. Then, just as I thought I was going mad, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, raspy breath, like something was standing right outside my tent, just on the other side of the thin fabric. Slowly, like I was moving through thick mud, I unzipped the flap of my tent. It was pitch black outside, the kind of darkness that felt suffocating, like the forest had swallowed every shred of light. I saw nothing. The only thing I could hear was the wind in the trees, but that whispering, it lingered in my head like it was circling just out of reach. I was about to zip the flap back up when something brushed against my hand. It wasn't a breeze. It wasn't the soft touch of fabric. It was cold like fingers. I screamed. I swear I screamed as loud as I've ever screamed. I don't know how my voice didn't crack the silence around us, but somehow it didn't. My friends came rushing to my tent, their faces bleary with sleep and alcohol. They couldn't see anything, of course. They couldn't feel what I felt. No one else had heard the whispers. They thought I was just freaking out, maybe a little too much whiskey in my system. But I knew something had touched me. When I finally looked at my hand, I saw it. A deep, fresh scratch running across the palm. It wasn't a scrape, not like I'd brushed against something sharp. No, it was a clean, precise line like something had slashed at me with purpose. But there were no animals around, no signs of anything nearby that could have caused it. The skin around the wound was unnaturally pale, as though it had been carved out of my very flesh. We spent the rest of the night awake, huddled together around the fire. No one spoke much after that, not even in the morning. We packed up early, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed. But when we got back to where the circle had been, there was nothing. No ashes. No bones, no symbols in the dirt. It was as though it had never been there at all. Just clean, untouched earth. We left, of course. There was no discussion. We just packed up like a single, quiet thought had passed through all of our minds. We didn't speak much about it, but that night haunted me. That whispering, those voices, I still hear them sometimes. When I'm alone, when the air gets too still. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up to a faint murmur just beyond the edge of hearing. I don't know what we disturbed that night. I don't know who or what was waiting for us. But I do know this. Something followed us back, and it whispers still. Story 3. It was supposed to be a simple father-daughter trip. A weekend in the woods, just the two of us. A chance for me to reconnect with my daughter, Emily, who was growing up far too fast. She was 9 at the time, old enough to roast marshmallows over an open fire, yet still young enough to get excited about things like stargazing and campfire stories. We arrived at our site just before sunset, the air cool and crisp as we set up our tent by the edge of a small clearing. The fire pit was nothing special, just a circle of stone in the center of the clearing, but it felt like the perfect spot to build our campfire. Emily had insisted on picking the place, just far enough from the trail, but close enough to the woods to make it feel like we were truly in the wild. We spent the evening building the fire, cooking hot dogs, and laughing. Emily, in her usual exuberant way, told me about her new favorite book, some fantasy series about witches and talking animals. I let her ramble on, listening with half an ear as I prepared the fire for the night. The fire crackled and hissed as the flames reached higher, casting flickering shadows that danced on the trunks of the trees around us. As the night wore on, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the kind of peaceful quiet that you'd expect in the woods, but an eerie stillness. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just quiet. I brushed it off as just the way the night felt, but a small part of me couldn't shake the discomfort gnawing at my bones. Emily, oblivious, was happily poking at the fire with a stick. Then, out of nowhere, she froze. "Daddy," she said, her voice high-pitched. "Who's that girl?" I turned around, expecting to see a neighbor kid or someone who'd wandered into our camp. But there was no one. Nothing but the fire and the blackness of the woods stretching endlessly into the night. I frowned, confused. "What girl, sweetheart?" She pointed across the fire, her small finger trembling slightly. "She's sitting by the fire, but her face is blurry. I think she's sad." My heart skipped a beat. I looked again, but there was nothing there. No one. I could feel a cold draft rush across my skin, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Emily, there's no one there," I said, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. I forced a smile. "You're just seeing things. It's the firelight playing tricks." But Emily didn't seem convinced. Her eyes were locked on the spot where she had pointed, wide and unblinking, as if she was waiting for something or someone to step out of the shadows. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an uncomfortable tightening in my chest. I tried to distract her with more marshmallows, more jokes, but it didn't seem to work. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her little face creased with worry. "Daddy," she whispered after a long silence. "She's still there." I didn't want to say it out loud, but I was starting to feel the same thing. Something wasn't right. My daughter's imagination was wild, sure, but this wasn't just imagination. The way she was staring, so intent, so focused, it felt too real. That night, as we crawled into the tent to sleep, I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. I told myself that Emily was just tired, that maybe the dark woods had spooked her. But when she woke me in the middle of the night, her face pale and her breath shallow, my heart sank. "Daddy," she gasped, her voice trembling. "She's inside the tent." I bolted upright, my mind racing. There was no way. The tent had been zipped up tight. I had checked. Yet, as I reached for the flashlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there with us. I shined the beam around the small tent, expecting to see a figure, a shadow, anything. But there was nothing except the two of us. "Sweetheart, there's no one here," I said, my voice shaking now. I held her close, trying to calm her down, but my mind was elsewhere. That feeling, something was wrong. The way Emily had spoken about the girl, the way she'd pointed to the fire. It wasn't just fear, it was something else. Something older, deeper. We barely slept that night. Every creak of the tent fabric, every rustle of the wind through the trees had me on edge. Emily's whispered, "She's inside the tent," echoed in my ears like a mantra. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I was a wreck. We packed up quickly, not saying much, both of us eager to leave the campsite behind. On our way out, I told myself it was all in my head. The darkness had played tricks on both of us. It was nothing, but as we passed the ranger station, I couldn't help myself. I had to ask, have there been any strange occurrences around these parts? I asked, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't about to lose my mind. The ranger looked at me, his face drawn, like he had heard this before. "You're not the first to ask," he said, his voice low. "A little girl went missing in these woods about 10 years ago. Her name was Lily. They searched for weeks, but they never found her. All they found was her doll. It was sitting near a fire pit, right where you said you were camping." I froze. My throat went dry. "Do you know what happened to her?" I asked, barely able to speak. The ranger shook his head. "No one knows. Some say she's still out there, waiting for someone to find her, to come back." I looked at Emily, who was standing quietly by the truck, her eyes wide as she stared at the ground. She had drawn something in the dirt with a stick, a face. But the face was wrong. There were no eyes, no mouth, just a blank, featureless shape. "She still draws her," I whispered, the horror of it all sinking in. "She still draws her, and she has no face." We left that day, never speaking of it again. But every now and then, when Emily sleeps, I find her sketching again. The same faceless girl. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind picks up outside our window, I swear I hear soft whispers. A little girl calling for help.